The human settlement rested on a wide plain of silver grass that moved gently with the wind. Above it, the stars were sharp and clear, brighter than they ever looked on Earth. This planet had no large cities, no glowing towers, and no loud machines. It was a place built for watching, listening, and learning. That was why Elias Verne lived there. Elias was not a soldier or a hero. He was a linguist and a sky watcher, someone who studied patterns, meanings, and the quiet ways the universe tried to speak. He spent most nights outside, sitting near his small observation dome, recording star movements and radio signals that almost no one else cared about. He believed that if humanity was ever noticed by something greater, it would not be because of weapons or strength, but because of attention. Tonight felt different. He noticed it first in the stars. They were still bright, but the patterns were wrong. Not broken, not chaotic, just adjusted. Constellations he had memorized over years seemed gently shifted, as if someone had nudged them into new places. His instruments showed no danger, no radiation, no incoming objects. Everything said the universe was calm. But Elias felt watched. He stepped away from his console and looked up with his own eyes. The air was cool and carried a soft, clean scent from the silver grass. The settlement lights behind him were low and quiet. Most people were asleep. This was his favorite time, when the world felt honest. That was when he heard a voice. "You noticed," it said. Elias froze. His heart did not race, but his breath stopped for a moment. The voice was close, gentle, and clear. It did not sound threatening. It sounded curious. He turned slowly. She stood a few steps away from him, barefoot on the grass, as if she had always been there. She looked young, about the age of a human teenager, but not human. Her skin held a soft glow, like moonlight on water. Her eyes were large and dark, reflecting the stars above instead of the world around her. She wore no suit, no device, nothing that suggested technology. She smiled, small and calm. "The night was chosen for us," she said. Elias did not speak at first. Years of training told him to observe before reacting. His mind raced through possibilities: hallucination, unknown life form, psychological stress. None of them felt right. She was too real, too solid, too quietly confident. "Chosen for what?" he asked finally. "To meet," she replied, "to notice each other." He swallowed and glanced toward the settlement. No alarms, no movement. No one else seemed aware of her presence. "Why me?" he asked. She tilted her head, studying him the way one might study a new word. "Because you look up without asking the stars to obey you." That answer stayed with him, heavy and strange. They stood in silence for a moment. The grass moved around their feet. The stars continued their slow, impossible drift. "You're not afraid," she observed. "I am," Elias said honestly, "but fear doesn't mean I stop listening." Her smile grew warmer. "That is rare." He took a careful step closer. She did not move away. "Are you real?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "and no, I am real enough for this night." That did not comfort him, but it did not frighten him either. "Why tonight?" he asked. "Why now?" She looked up at the sky, and Elias followed her gaze. The stars shimmered, not brighter but deeper, as if layers of meaning were hidden behind their light. "Because tonight," she said, "your species noticed the pattern." Elias frowned. "We notice patterns all the time." "Not like this," she replied. "Most species see the universe as something to survive or conquer or escape." Humans began asking why the universe feels old, patient, and unfinished. That question echoed. Echoed to where? To those who listen. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You're an observer," he said slowly. "Yes. Of us. Of many." Elias sat down on the grass without thinking. His legs felt weak, not from fear but from the weight of what she was saying. If she was telling the truth, then humanity was not alone in the way it had always believed. "Are we in danger?" he asked. She shook her head. "Danger is not the purpose of observation." "Judgment then?" Again she shook her head. "Learning," he laughed softly, unable to stop himself. "You're learning from us." Yes, she said simply. That seemed impossible. Humans were still arguing among themselves, still struggling with fear, loss, and uncertainty. They were not wise masters of the universe. They were barely holding their own world together. You chose the wrong species, he said. She crouched down so they were at the same level. Her eyes met his, steady and kind. You choose yourselves every day, she said, despite knowing how flawed you are. He had no answer for that. The night deepened. Time felt strange, stretched thin like glass. Elias realized he had not checked his instruments in a while, but he no longer cared. This moment felt larger than data. What happens after tonight? He asked. That depends on what you do with knowing you were seen. Will you come back? Not in this way. Will others come? Eventually, she said, if you keep choosing curiosity over control. He nodded slowly. That sounded like a challenge and a hope at the same time. Why do you look like a girl? He asked. She considered the question carefully. Because your stories listen better when spoken by someone who reminds you of beginnings. That answer stayed with him too. The stars began to settle, their patterns easing back toward familiar shapes. The night air warmed slightly. Elias felt the moment slipping away like a dream fading after waking. She stood. The night is ending, she said. Wait, he said, rising quickly. How do I prove this happened? She looked at him gently. You won't, not yet. That's not fair, she smiled again. Neither is being alone in a universe full of voices. Before he could respond, her glow softened, thinning like mist under sunlight. The grass beneath her feet stopped shining. The space she occupied felt suddenly empty but not cold. She was gone. Elias stood there long after dawn began to touch the horizon. The settlement woke slowly behind him, unaware that anything had changed. But Elias knew. Humanity had been noticed, and the universe at last had listened back. Elias did not sleep after that night. When the sun fully rose, painting the silver grass with soft gold light, he was still standing outside the observation dome. The stars had returned to their familiar places. Every instrument showed normal readings. The universe looked calm, quiet, and unchanged. But Elias knew better. He walked back inside and sat at his desk. His hands hovered over the console, unsure what to record. He had spent his whole life writing reports, translating signals, and describing patterns with careful, scientific language. But what words could explain a girl made of starlight who spoke of chosen nights and listening universes? He started anyway. He wrote exactly what he saw, not theories, not guesses, just facts as he experienced them. Her appearance, her voice, her words. When he finished, he read it back and felt foolish. It sounded like a story, not a report. He saved the file and locked it behind personal clearance. For days after, nothing happened. No visitors, no strange skies. The settlement continued its slow, peaceful routine. Elias joined meetings, reviewed data, and answered questions like he always had. To everyone else, he was the same quiet linguist with a habit of staring at the stars too long. But inside, everything had shifted. At night, he returned to the same place where she had stood. He sat in the grass and looked up, half expecting her to appear again. She never did. Still, he felt less alone than he ever had before. He began to notice small things, patterns in radio noise that felt less random, long-term climate cycles that aligned too perfectly. Old human myths that suddenly seemed less symbolic and more remembered. It was as if his mind had been open to connections he had once ignored. Weeks passed. Then the dreams started. In his dreams, Elias stood in vast dark spaces filled with slow-moving lights. He heard voices, not speaking words but ideas, curiosity, patience, waiting. He woke each time with a sense of calm rather than fear. He did not tell anyone, until the day the council asked him to explain his latest findings. The settlement council was small, made of scientists, engineers, and social planners. They trusted Elias because he was careful and honest. When he presented his recent analysis, he avoided mentioning the girl. Instead, he spoke about patterns. These signals, he said, pointing at the display, are not messages. They are reflections, responses. Something is observing how we observe. The room grew quiet. That's a serious claim, one council member said. I know, Elias replied. But it fits the data better than chance. Another leaned forward. Are you saying someone is watching us? Yes, Elias said simply, but not like an enemy, more like a listener. There was no panic, no shouting, just thoughtful silence. Humans had changed since Earth. They had learned that fear solved very little. The council asked questions. Elias answered what he could. When the meeting ended, they did not dismiss him. They asked him to continue his research quietly. That night, Elias returned to the grass again. This is what you wanted, isn't it? He said softly to the stars. For us to notice being noticed. The air felt warmer, as if in response, but nothing appeared. Months passed. Word spread slowly among select researchers. Humanity might not be alone, and contact might already have begun in a way that did not involve ships or weapons. Instead of excitement, the reaction was thoughtful. What do? People asked. The answer was never clear. Humanity did not send messages demanding response. They did not build beacons or signals of dominance. Instead, they changed how they acted. More resources went into preservation. Art, music, and history were protected with new care. Conflicts were handled with longer conversations and fewer threats. Not because humans suddenly became perfect, but because the idea of being observed made them reflect. If someone was listening, what kind of story did humanity want to tell? Elias watched this shift with quiet wonder. He had not expected it. He had assumed disbelief, denial, maybe fear. Instead, humans did what they always did best when at their best. They adapted emotionally. One night, while reviewing old Earth literature, Elias noticed something that made his breath catch. Ancient stories across cultures spoke of watchers, sky children, gentle messengers who came not to rule but to witness. These stories had always been explained away as imagination. Now he was not so sure. Have you always been there? He whispered. The dreams became clearer. In one, the alien girl stood again, but this time she was not alone. Shapes moved behind her, vast and slow. Not bodies, not machines, but intelligences that felt ancient and patient. They did not speak. They simply watched humanity grow, stumble, rise, and question itself. When Elias woke, tears filled his eyes, though he did not know why. He began to understand. The observers were not looking for strength. They were looking for continuity, species that could survive not just physically but morally. Civilizations that asked, should we, more often than can we. Humanity was not special because it was powerful. Humanity was special because it doubted itself. One evening the sky changed again, not dramatically. No lights, no storms. Just a feeling of depth, like the universe had leaned closer. Elias stepped outside, heart steady, breath calm. Are you there? He asked. This time the voice answered, not beside him but inside his awareness. Yes. He did not see her, but he felt her presence, familiar and gentle. Why me? He asked again. Because you listen even when there is no reply. Others are listening now too, he said. The whole species in its own way. That was the hope. Elias sat down and closed his eyes. What happens if we fail? He asked quietly. Then we will remember you kindly. That answer hurt more than he expected. And if we succeed, then one day you will stand where I stand now. He opened his eyes, staring at the stars. To watch, he asked, to listen. The presence faded, leaving him alone with the night. But it was a different kind of alone than before. Elias realized then that humanity was no longer just surviving in the universe. It was participating in it, not loudly, not violently, but honestly. The observers had not come to save humanity. They had come to see if humanity could save itself. And for the first time, Elias believed that maybe, just maybe, they could. The years passed quietly, but they did not pass unchanged. Elias grew older on the Silvergrass world. his hair slowly turning gray, his steps a little slower, his eyes still drawn to the sky every night. Humanity continued its work among the stars, not rushing, not shouting its presence, but living in a way that felt deliberate. The idea of being observed never became a public spectacle. It became something deeper, almost private, shared through culture rather than announcements. Children learned to ask questions before answers. Scientists were encouraged to pause and consider consequences, not just results. Artists spoke openly about responsibility, beauty, and continuity. Humanity was still human. Mistakes were made. Arguments happened. But something steady held them together now, like a quiet promise. Elias remained at the center of it, though he never asked to be. He was often invited to speak, not as a prophet but as a witness. He never claimed certainty. He never said humanity was chosen or special. He only told them that once, on a long night, something had listened. And listening, he reminded them, went both ways. As he aged, the dreams returned less often, but when they did, they were clearer than ever. He saw not just the observers but fragments of futures, not fixed paths but possibilities, worlds where humanity faded into silence, worlds where it burned brightly and briefly, and a few, rare ones, where humans became something quieter and stronger at the same time. In those visions, humanity did not rule the stars. It joined them. One evening, long after most of his old colleagues had retired or passed on, Elias felt the familiar shift in the air again. The sky did not change shape. The stars did not move. But the silence deepened, as if the universe had drawn close enough to breathe beside him. He walked out into the grass, leaning on his cane, and smiled softly. "You waited," he said. "Yes," came the reply, warm and familiar. This time she appeared slowly, as if stepping out of the space between moments. She looked the same as before, unchanged by time. The alien girl stood before him, glowing gently, her expression calm and thoughtful. "You look older," she said. "I am," Elias replied. "That happens." She studied him with the same careful curiosity she had shown all those years ago. "Your species continues." "Yes," he said. "Not perfectly, but honestly. That is enough." They sat together in the grass just as before. Elias felt no fear now, only a quiet sense of completion. "Is this goodbye?" he asked. "In a way," she said, "and in another a beginning." He nodded. "For us." "For all," she replied. "You have passed the long test." He laughed softly. "We didn't know we were being tested." "You were," she said, "by yourselves." She explained then, fully and openly. The observers were not a single species, but a gathering of civilizations that had survived their own growth without destroying their meaning. They watched young species not to judge, but to learn how life continued, choosing kindness, restraint, and curiosity in an uncaring universe. Most failed, not because they were evil, but because they were loud. They burned too brightly, too fast. Humanity had been different. "You took your time," she said. "You doubted, you argued, you changed course." "We still fight," Elias said. "We still struggle," she nodded. "So do we." He looked at her with new understanding. "You're not perfect either." "No," she said gently, "just patient." The stars began to glow with a subtle warmth, not brighter but closer. Elias felt something opening, like a door that had always been there, waiting. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "we stop watching from a distance." He felt a lump in his throat. "Others will meet you." "Yes, slowly, carefully," he smiled. "That's very human of you," she smiled back. "You taught us well." Elias felt tired then, but not weak. The weight he had carried since that first night finally lifted. He realized his part was nearly done. "I won't see all of it," he said. "No," she agreed, "but you helped make it possible." She stood and held out her hand. He took it, surprised at how solid and warm it felt. "Will you remember me?" he asked. She looked at him with something like affection. "We already do." As dawn approached, her glow softened. The presence around them did not vanish this time. It remained, gentle and steady, like a quiet gathering just beyond sight. Elias returned to the settlement one last time. He recorded his final report, not for science but for history. He wrote about patience, about listening, about choosing meaning over speed. When he passed, it was peaceful under a familiar sky. Years later, when humanity finally met others face to face, the stories began not with conquest or fear, but with a simple truth passed down through generations. The universe was vast, and once, on a quiet night, it had chosen to listen. And humanity had answered, not with noise but with care.